What episode is this? We're still in season 1. I do know that.
Season 1, episode 3.
Episode number 3, here with Fingerprints on Medals. And we're so excited about people who have listened to the podcast on various outlets, Spotify and others, and also the number of visitors to our YouTube channel. And we appreciate everybody who's subscribed to that. Based on some statistics that I did, we're doing pretty well early on. And so we're real excited about this opportunity. And tonight's really special for Scott and I because we've got a great friend with us who's also extremely knowledgeable. And, you know, this is founded on education. Yep. As we talk to coaches, we talk to athletes, we talk to healthcare providers, strength conditioning coaches, lifelong athletes, and at all scales. You know, particularly what Greg's going to touch on tonight about movement. And man, if we could all still move the way that infants move, we'd be in a pretty good shape. I've got some pictures of my grandson and when he was 1 and 2 and 3 and what he can still do at age 6. I wish we could do our whole lives, and we can if we stay at it. Yeah. As Greg's nodding his head over there. So I want to, obviously, my co-host, Scott Hudson. And Scott, first of all, let's talk about your son, Bing.
Yeah. I think
great week last week.
Yeah, 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, we were talking about he was trying to get the steeple qualifier. We went down to Vanderbilt on Friday, May 1st, and he was in the first heat, ran a great heat, and won the race and went 8:49.85 for a 4-second PR, which more significantly puts him at 35th out of 48 in the East region. So he's excited about that. He's still mellow about it. We didn't talk about it. But that should get you in. It gets faster each year. He was last in 2 years ago at 8:53.94. So he's excited. We're going to Jacksonville this weekend to watch the conference meet. We've got a great steepler down there, Christian Imroth from Eastern Kentucky University.
Oh, yeah,
He runs an 8:30. He's been to nationals, so he may or may not run, but it'll be a good test. And I think Bing will just try to lower his time and just solidify it a little bit more and get better.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. Here we are in May. There's a lot of great things about the month of May. One is collegiate track and field. And the regional that you mentioned, the east side of the country goes to Lexington, Kentucky this year. And who is it? Does Arkansas host the West?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Which seems odd that it's there.
So a short drive from Indianapolis to get to Lexington to watch all the locals that we have involved there. And a lot of those athletes who will be in the East Regional from Butler University have had hands-on training from our guest tonight, Greg Moore. And so Greg is a certified strength conditioning specialist, all around, top of the list, great guy, high character, studies his craft like no one I've ever seen in his profession, and a great teacher, a great listener, and the line of athletes behind me cheering for Greg Moore is a long, long list, and he just endears himself to his athletes, the people he works with. Scott and I have seen it for years, and so welcome to Fingerprints on Medals, Greg Moore.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so your journey, you started as an athlete in college out west.
Yeah, South Dakota.
All right.
Born and raised.
Born and raised in South Dakota. Found your way to the Midwest because of what? Give us a little bit of that story.
Yeah, from South Dakota. So it's small college, University of Sioux Falls. The round ball took me to the University of Sioux Falls, not education. I wasn't ready to grow up. I wanted to play basketball a little bit longer, and I chose a school that would allow me to do that for 4 years. And along that journey, I ran into my first mentor. Scott Kiefer was a professor of mine that introduced me to strength conditioning. In my sophomore year, I was taking living anatomy, and we got to study with cadavers. And he said, "You like to train. You love sports. You ever thought about being a strength conditioning coach?" And I had no idea what he was talking about because never had one in high school, didn't want to have one at the NAIA level. And so he was really the first person that introduced me to Boyd Epley down at the University of Nebraska, who was doing great things at that time. And so little did I know that not every place was the University of Nebraska that had those resources. So I learned that quickly when I finally got into it. But yeah, I always say the round ball is what led me to strength conditioning, because I had an opportunity to meet Scott as my first mentor, and then an internship at the end of my undergrad at University of Sioux Falls brought me to Indianapolis, and my first residence in Indianapolis was Resco Hall at Butler University the summer of 1992. I will say it.
How about that?
Long time ago. But and I interned at the National Institute for Fitness and Sport, and we all know Nancy Lee was my
Yeah.
intern supervisor, and she actually gets the blame or the credit, whatever you want to do, for me being at Butler today, because she called my wife when I was at Vanderbilt, and I'm jumping ahead here, but she called my wife when I was at Vanderbilt 2 months in, November 1st. I just started September 1. She said, "Hey, the job at Butler just came open." So fast forward 5 months, and I was from Vandy back to Butler. So anyway,
Yeah.
yeah.
So to tie that together, Scott Hudson, Greg Moore, and I all worked together at St. Vincent Sports Performance for a period of time, as well as a cast of many others, wonderful clinicians and people. And to tie in the Vanderbilt story, Greg, you went there. Well, first of all, you were with the Indiana Fever as part of a contract with St. Vincent and the Fever. You were the strength coach.
Yep.
Stephanie was playing
Yeah.
and developed that relationship. And then Stephanie, fast forward, she becomes the head coach at Vanderbilt of women's basketball. She gets you to go to Nashville
Yep.
and then back to Indianapolis because of the Butler position.
Yep.
And I know you and Stephanie are still very much communicate and in touch with one another. And some other Indiana Fever folks, Tamika Catchings
Yes.
was a person. Of course, that whole roster, you had an impact upon them and so forth. But I want to get right into what I think is really important and why I wanted you to be a part of Fingerprints on Medals. And, you know, that whole name is, you know, the team behind the team behind the person. And you as a strength coach, and that title doesn't do you justice, because I always think, well, is it strength? Is it movement? Is it mobility? Is it pliability? Is it flexibility? You know, all of those words, you know, and so Greg, tell us your philosophy about athlete development. Let's just start right there.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with the team behind the teams, because it really goes back, and I can be long-winded, so just cut me off at any point.
I will.
But because it really, the team behind the teams, I don't know if it's your tagline or not, or you came up with it, but I give you the credit because that's where I first heard it. But I was in Kansas City with my family working for Velocity Sports Performance, and I got a phone call on a drive to South Dakota on October 1st. That's my birthday, everybody. So you now
There
know
you
my
go.
birthday. But that's how I remember stuff. So
Mhm.
I'm driving. You called me and asked if I'd be interested in coming to work for St. Vincent Sports Performance on that day. And I said, "Ralph, I just moved here, whatever, 4 months ago." I said, if I was still in Indianapolis, I'd be interested. But you said, don't say no. Let's just keep the conversation going. And you really sold me on the team behind the teams. I was a strength coach that had relationships with sports med docs, athletic trainers, physical therapists, sports nutrition, sports psychologists, but not on the same team.
Mhm.
And you sold me on that. And, it's one of the best decisions my family and I made was to leave Kansas City after only being there 8 months and moving back to Indianapolis, where we started our family and continued to grow our family in 2005. So, and you said, you got a 30,000 square foot brand new shiny facility in Kansas City. He goes, I can't promise you that today, but here's my vision, here's our mission. And after 14 years I was there, you delivered on. And I say you, but the people that you brought on board with our team just, was able to do some pretty cool things.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I know one of the great things, thank you for saying all that. One of the great things, I'll just throw this in. God had a pretty big hand in that too.
Sure he did.
And I could say that because
Amen.
I know how the two of you and the three of us think and our beliefs and so forth. And so, we've been really fortunate in that manner. But Scott talks about it, and we talked about it on one of our other episodes of starting to build. If you're an athlete, if you're a coach, if you're a parent, how do you build the team? It's not just a single provider, because a single provider can't dig deep enough in the disciplines.
Right. 100%.
I'm a generalist. I think of myself a lot as a generalist. I could talk about a lot of topics, but unless I really focus on one particular thing, which sleep has been sort of my place I really enjoy thinking about and studying, you have a chance to go deep. But we're so blessed in Indianapolis, in particular, to have great people in this network we've built. But you can do that anywhere. But back to Greg Moore and the team behind the team, but as you get with an athlete and we've been through, and I've heard your philosophies. I'd just like for you to share your philosophy about developing athletes, and you talk about their training age. Somebody may come to college, might be 17 years old, but their training age might be something different. Talk about that.
Yeah, so training age. So think back to Stephen Underwood. He's from Canada. He's one of our co-workers at St. Vincent for many years, and now he's with Exos. And, he's from Canada and the Canadian athlete development model. So learning to train to train, train to compete, and train to win. I've never lived in Canada, let alone I've never visited there, but I feel like they got it figured out, and we're upside down in how we go about it here in the U.S. But learned a lot from Stephen over those years, and we're still in contact today and that sort of thing. But from a sport specific standpoint, so let's just pick on basketball, for example. They start playing the minute they come out of the womb, and by the time they're 18, they're burnt out mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and they end up on our doorstep, and they're done. And they may be really skilled at the game of basketball, but have they trained their movement patterns along the way and that sort of thing? So just because they're 18 doesn't mean that their chronological age matches up with their training age. And so I always say, I'm a collection of those that I've worked around. I'm a collection of the students that I've had the privilege to work with over the years. And I always say student athlete regardless of age, because we're students for life. We should be students for life. And so I like to use the analogy of being a hardware store with tools that I'm putting in front of contractors to build a house of strength and speed for their sport, and then when sport ends, for life. And so I'm only as good as the contractors that are going to pick it up, look, listen, and feel. Well, what's that mean? Are you looking at me? Are you engaged with me? Are you listening? And now I'm going to show you something. All right, look, listen, and feel. Are you going to feel like you have to be mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually engaged to accomplish something really, really well? And that's just life in general. That's not just training. That's just
and Greg,
conditioning.
that's the athlete you're talking about.
100%.
The person in front of you. That
100%.
person has to buy in, has to get engaged in the process. And so what triggers that? What triggers that engagement?
Want to versus have to. And those are the ones that are going to go on and become the best version of themselves, is those that really dive in. I'm very fortunate at Butler working with our distance program, and Coach Rowe runs a tight ship, if you want to call it that, but a high performance model. And I know that both of you know that because you've experienced it and you're part of that team. The team behind the teams is not just inside the four walls of Butler University. It's outside. I mean, he'll advocate for his kids till the day they leave. And you've been around in our sessions in the morning on Mondays and Wednesdays, 30 to 40 student athletes. If you walked in that gymnasium setting, you could hear a pin drop. and he calls it concentration is toughness, and I really believe that. Now, they don't play with the basketball or any other apparatus in their sports, so they tend to lean in a little bit more and engage a little bit more and look, listen, and feel a little bit more, because one shot, one opportunity with the body, and that's all they got to win or lose. And so they're a little more engaged because that is their sport, that's their wheelhouse. But if we could get our other sport athletes to think about that, you know, I always say the four whys to winning equal really the fifth why to winning. So if you think about stability, flexibility, mobility, pliability, the ability of muscles to glide and slide freely, all right, they all end in Y, and athletes say, why do I got to do that? Well, because the fifth is availability. Are you available to perform?
100%.
And that's where, to me, that's where it starts, and unfortunately, that's where it ends.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's been a selling point that I've used often when I was in the recruiting process at Butler with different sports and so forth. I would sort of bundle it, because then the parents sort of would lean in a little bit. And when you talked about your greatest ability is your availability.
Yeah, Tony
And-
Dungy.
Yeah. And then people sort of, that makes sense, right? And we can look at careers, we can look at all kinds of stories from not being available when it's appropriate time. But I want to go back to something you talked about in movement patterns. What's a movement pattern?
The good, the bad, and the ugly, right?
Right.
I mean, we're all made uniquely different, right? So, another colleague of ours used the term squat save lives, and he's not really far from it. I mean, think about from the time you enter this world to the time you leave to live a quality of life. Think about squatting. You got to get up and down from this chair that we're sitting in. All right. So I always thought that was funny that he used that, but very real. So, but limb length, right? Limb length is different on everybody. So everybody's squat pattern is going to look different. But everybody should be able to squat. And I'm just using, bending as.
So let's break
as an
that down.
example.
So from a standpoint, and I've watched you work, and I've seen my colleagues work, and Scott, and all of a sudden you talk about the ability to squat, but somebody might look at their big toe
Yeah.
and their ankle
Right.
and their spine.
And they should.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
So dig into that a little bit. If we were to evaluate or to give a coach of runners, some advice, and I first of all, I'm going to qualify this. We had long debates at St. Vincent Sports Performance about putting all of our skills on video,
Yeah.
and the vote was we were against that,
Yeah.
because there's so much value in cueing the athlete, observing the athlete, observing the movement, making corrections in real time. So to be on a podcast and say, hey, coaches, look for this,
Yeah.
and not to give the recipe for success, but if we've got a group of athletes and somebody sees something and says, well, I'm going to have my cross country team A skip, all right? And we've seen high schoolers learn how to A skip, and their balance is off. They can't move the same leg, opposite arm, and all those patterns. And so is that what needs to be properly evaluated and properly trained to create the best version of their gait or their movement pattern?
Yeah. You've said a lot there.
I know I did.
So my head is spinning, Ralph. I'm not even sure where to go, but I'm going to go here. I've always said movement is geometry and language, and because it's angles, right?
Yeah.
It's all about angles, and then language is, do they understand what I'm telling them?
Yeah.
Do they? I mean, because my verbal, I'm so thankful that I still can move and give a left leg demonstration really well, because my right leg is way behind my left, because you're always trying to give your best demonstration. My left has way more reps than my right, and but it should. If I'm trying to help somebody get better, I gotta give them my best demonstration. So I'm very thankful and obviously blessed to be able to still move and demonstrate. Probably not as good as I was 30 years ago.
No, you're not.
Thank you. But it's important, I think. So when I think about, you mentioned the big toe. I mean, if you would have told me many years ago when I got into it that somebody's lack of big toe function would end their 12-year NBA career, I said, what? They can't. I mean, a big toe? It's real. We saw it.
Yeah.
And we're not gonna say who it is, but we witnessed that at St. Vincent Sports Performance. Now, that person's fine today. As far, 12 years in the NBA at that kind of money did fine, but that individual was not ready to stop playing.
Right.
And the big toe was the end of the career. So, yeah, it starts with, big toe didn't pop up in my head until really that individual, and how important that was.
Greg, you always use a cueing that it goes into my mind when I'm doing my workouts. Big toe, little toe, heel.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great teaching tool to get somebody to start thinking about movement development, is to, when you have your foot on the ground, that you have, correct me if I'm wrong here, that you have contact. You can feel contact with your big toe, your little toe, and your heel, and create that contact on the ground.
And it's really on, if this is my foot, it's really on the fascia of the foot. So obviously the tips are going to be down, but you don't want them pressing the tips, or if this is the big toe coming down on the fascia, little toe, and then obviously the heel, create that tripod position. For sure. I always say software versus hardware, and our hardware is what we've been given, right? The software is taking the knowledge, taking the information in, and can you transfer it up and down the kinetic chain over and over and over? Okay, so think about that. When you first learn something, 4 stages of learning at anything, forget movement, forget strength conditioning, pick the topic. All right, unconscious incompetent, stage 1. What? Have no clue. Right, then you move to conscious incompetent. I understand it, but I can't perform it. All right, then I move into conscious competent, stage 3. I understand it, but boy, I really have to, it's a brain teaser. I really have to think really, really hard to accomplish this. All right. Stage 4, unconscious competent. I've done it so many times over and over correctly that it becomes automatic. Now think about that in an athlete. If they get to stage 4 and high quality movement, do we decrease the chance of injury in sport? Do we increase performance? Yeah. But that's a long ways away from just let automatically happen.
Yeah. And so what happens in sport, we could all give examples of this, and it goes back to that athlete in front of you has to engage, and they have to want to, versus just being there. Right. And it's that trigger of what sparks it. Somebody starts doing an exercise and they come back in, and it might be a teammate or somebody says, "Hey, you look stronger than you used to be." And that becomes an emotional trigger.
Yeah, for sure.
Hey, coach gives you a compliment, says, "Hey, your stride length looked longer today." Something's working. You never know what triggers an athlete to feel good about it and start to measure, what I'm doing, something is manifesting to where I'm getting a compliment around that, right? Or, this whole process of going from unconscious, no, what's the first stage?
Unconscious incompetent, stage 1.
So I I'm age 68 and I have such an issue balancing on my right leg. Horrible. I've had total knee replacement. I limped for 25 years with a bad knee, and and my left side, I can't wait to get to my left side because, man, I look like the Statue of Liberty.
Yeah, right.
Because I'm so stable. I get to my right side and I'm all over the place. But I'm getting better. I know I'm getting better. And I remember back at St. Vincent with some of our colleagues of Shane White and Terry Donovan and Lisa Martin and all kinds of people, Daryl Barnes, the names endless and we had these discussions of, can you train balance? Can a human being increase their balance? Most people would answer that and say, no. You're born with what you have, right? You agree? And I think that until something confronts that athlete, a cross-country runner going around a turn, hits a tree root in the ground and gets bumped at the same time, and they fall off balance and they're out of the race.
Yeah.
They're 60 positions behind now by the time they get up. Can you correct that and give them, now there's all kinds of things here too, right? Pillar strength, stability. Right. But the balance component is very much trainable. I stood there and watched it in our gymnasium and with our physical therapists, our athletic trainers, our strength coaches, teaching people how to balance better. Yeah. And I think if somebody were to ask me, say, Ralph, what's one thing I could have everybody in my middle school program work on? I'd say single leg balance. Yeah. Okay, how do we work on that? Should we take our shoes off? Should I be in a real high cushioned Hoka shoe, or should I be flat-footed and barefoot?
Get your foot on the ground.
When I saw you allow athletes in the weight room with no shoes on, I thought the world has stopped spinning. Right. What on earth are we doing?
This guy just gave him a loaded gun.
Yeah, exactly. Take your shoes off, train without your shoes on. I thought, what are we doing?
Drop weights on those toes.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's this guy? Negligence.
But it's this continuous morphing of understanding the human body and sort of pushing the limits. And I know I'm all over the place here, but to get an athlete to buy in, cliche, right? To feel good about, to feel, hey, I am a little bit better because of those silly things that Greg and Scott and others are having me do. Now I'm leaning in a little bit more. Yeah. And that's the golden moment for me to watch, is when, cliche, the light bulb gets brighter. Yeah. And now that athlete wants to get to those exercises, whether it's the weight room, whether it's the sideline, whether it's just the warm up before the event. They want to get there versus have to, right? But talk about your maybe progression of, let's stick with this balance component. If you were to take an athlete, which you have, and you were to start to build the balance component, not take somebody like a Jesse Hamlin who's been doing it for years, but still needs to be cued on it and reminded, right? Right. Needs to have their belly tapped and their back tapped, as you do, to remind them to do those things. So I'll let you chat.
I want to talk about light bulbs because you talked about light bulbs there. So the message that I try to tell our student athletes is that don't turn any part of your life off. Just put all your sorry, I'm getting wrapped up in this, but your life is a bunch of light bulbs, okay? Your personal life, so on and so forth. So don't ever turn them off. Put them all on dimmer switches. So you're now walking into the weight room at Butler University. Turn that one up high and turn these all down on low. And then when you leave here, switch the dimmer switches and that sort of thing. So just telling them that mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, you have to be engaged to be successful at anything in life, not just in the weight room, classroom, with your family, that sort of thing. So, and I say that a lot to remind myself, because I'm guilty as charged, right? Mm-hmm. So where does it start? I think it starts in my world. If you're a new athlete to me, Ralph, walking in, and this was not staged. And I do not sell Roga foam rollers, but if you haven't been on a Roga foam roller, you need to get one because it is golden. And I don't even have these at St. Vincent. I don't even have these at Butler yet, but we need to get them. This is my personal one, and absolutely love it. But to me, it starts with foam rolling, and most of our athletes absolutely hate it at first, but then it becomes kind of a love-hate relationship.
Why do they hate it?
Because it hurts.
Yeah.
They don't realize how tight their fascia is, and the muscles need to glide and slide freely, okay? And so I start with foam rolling. I teach them how to foam roll. From there, we go into mobility work, from the ankle to the hip, a whole series all the way up. I call it, from fingernails to toenails. Go ahead, Scott.
Oh, and you're hitting right on that. You're a big believer in starting from the ground up, right?
Yeah.
And we're so caught up in today's world where you said it, shoot the basketball at the womb and hit a hockey stick, but really starting that foundation. I remember how diligent you were when I asked you to train some runners.
Yeah.
And they all want to do all the fancy A skip, B skip.
Yeah.
And you said, no, we're not going to do this. We're going to start right here on the ground. Because if you can't move on the ground, you can't move when you get upright.
Yeah. It goes back to how do we start, right? We crawled. We crawled before we walked.
Yeah.
We walked before we ran. We ran before we sprint. And so that's kind of where it is. And I got all kinds of peers in college and people that don't know me think I'm crazy. But I mean, if you can't bridge and plank, front side, back side, left and right, you're not going to be very good once we get to our feet. You have to have that software knowledge embedded in the kinetic chain in order to be successful on your feet. So I think it's real important. Most of our student athletes spend a lot of time sitting in class. When they approach our room, I'm under the assumption, unless they've told me different, we'll communicate that. If they're coming from practice, that's a different story. But if they're coming from class, we're going to wake everything up and get everything turned on because it's turned off. It's shut off. They got, butt amnesia. There's another name for it that I use, but it's asleep, and we got to get awake and that sort of thing. So again, I go back to geometry and language. Okay, it's all about angles, and starting on the ground will follow you to your feet. And so I'm not sure what your initial question was, but I've got off on a tangent.
So this muscle activation, Scott and I talked a couple episodes ago about, the proper firing pattern on the backside, the low back, the glutes, and the hamstrings, and getting in that right sequence of firing. Well, if by default, most people by default don't fire their glutes.
Yep.
The glutes just don't fire because the low back is going to be the master of backside movement.
Yep.
And then secondarily, the hamstrings will get involved and you can do those things by default. It's like water going down a cornfield. It's going to find the easiest path to get through it. And that's why it curves and goes different directions. Why a river isn't straight, right? And it's because, and the same thing with the human body. The humans, particularly elite athletes, are so good at compensation.
Oh, yeah.
Unbelievably good at compensating and finding another way to do that, to get around the corner, to do different things. And so I remember when some of the first sessions we had with our NFL pre-draft training, some of the athletes were ready to leave because we embarrassed them.
Yeah, the warm-up was a wear down.
Yeah, they were worn out from the warm-up.
Yeah.
And they were embarrassed because they weren't very good at it.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable, eye-opening to me.
Gravity and body weight was crushing them.
Yeah, I remember one time I had an agent called me, says, Ralph, what's going on? He wants to leave. And I said, I don't know, let's chat. And as we dug into it, he was competing. He was there, didn't know anybody else in the group, didn't have any peers or whatever. And he was not the person he was on the field of play that he was on the floor in the performance center. he was embarrassed. He was deflated. And man, did we learn a lot from that. How we had to pre-teach him, right? We had to say, hey, we're going to take how many steps backwards to get your name called on draft day, right?
Yeah.
You got to take a lot of steps backwards. And because elite athletes just go. I see it in, motorsports now. Young drivers who are successful don't have any commitment to the other stuff, nutrition, hydration, sleep, strength, muscle activation, because they're so gifted. They get behind the wheel and they just do well.
Yeah.
Well, as that funnel gets tighter, or something breaks, my elbow's sore now. Now what have I got to do? So anyway, it's the amazing human body will fool us. It will fool coaches. It will fool the athlete themselves that everything's okay until it's not.
Yeah.
And so that's where we invest, to all of our listeners, that's where we invest so much into the work behind, alongside the competition, because we know that when stress occurs, we want the default system to rise to the occasion and be trained to act appropriately. And that's a long journey. It goes back to your 4 stages of development.
Yeah. Yeah, going back to the combine experience, we were no magical magicians or anything like that, turn these guys into 4.3 speedsters or anything like that. Those were elite athletes showing up on our doorstep that needed to recover and regenerate after a long football season, let alone a long college career. And you know how we went about it. That first 2 weeks was just getting them feeling better.
Right.
I was going to say, like, 3 weeks. I remember I'd be like, what are these guys doing? And they were, after 3 weeks, then they were ready to put some weight on the bar, right? Because you broke them down.
Yeah.
And for 3 weeks and corrected and did all that to get them ready for the next jump.
And going back to probably the individual that his agent called you, he's like, this isn't my strength, and he didn't know it at the time, but we were trying to help him recover and just feel better for the long, we called it the underwear Olympics, when they had to go run, jump, and be an athlete. When really some of those guys weren't cut out for that. They're standing on their football resume, which they all should. And so, we learned a lot, right? We learn a lot every day from our student athletes just by listening, and feeling to what they're giving us back and that sort of thing. So,
well, along those same lines, something that this falls right into the category with it, of all of this work can get very easily, it was either never established. I'm talking about an athlete who might show up even at high school, college, professional sports. Those first couple of days together, here we are mid-May, college campuses across the United States are going to have new football players show up on their campuses, that it's the first time they're at that school. Men's basketball, women's basketball. What is every athlete going to try to do in their first few days?
Impress.
Make an impression. They're going to make an impression of my speed, my strength, my physical ability, my jumping ability, my hustle, my motor, all those kinds of things. And I've seen it over and over where that's where accidents happen. That's where breakdowns occur. And so to anybody who can have an influence on a coaching staff to say, hey, let's bring them in, let's take it easy to begin with. Let's use the time for education and so forth. Well, culture is counter to that. We've got to load in the offense. We've got to load in the defense. We've got to keep them busy. We got to keep them, we only have so many hours. So pressure.
Hurry.
Hurry. And where's the development, the opportunity to rest and recover, mentally get comfortable from a mental health standpoint. One of my favorite athletes, he's now at the University of Nebraska. I don't know if Bowden Kepke. came to us at Butler University from Minnesota.
Yeah, barefoot guy.
Barefoot guy,
Love
right?
him. Love him.
I love him, right? Why do you love him? So Bowden Kapke, he was counter to everything I just said.
Yeah.
And Bowden came from Minnesota, came to Butler University, a basketball player, went to Boston College, got a few more minutes at Boston College, was playing quite a bit actually, and now he's at Nebraska. He's doing something right.
Yeah, he's a contractor building his house with Strength and Speed. I didn't get a chance to work with him, but I got to observe him and watch him. And
Yeah.
that's the best part of what I do and he's good. He's good. But yeah, talk about building a software package.
Well,
that guy gets it.
Yeah, and I remember on his recruiting trip, Mom and Dad were there, tall. Mom, Dad, tall. He had good genes.
Yeah.
And they're sitting in my office there in Hinkle Fieldhouse, and I'd been tipped off a little bit by the coaching staff saying, hey, they've really invested a lot in Bowden going to mental health support and eating the right things. He's really restricted in his diet and so forth, and he meditates and so forth. And I was like, oh, they're going to love my philosophy about sleep. And literally, the clock was running, recruiting trip around the field house, got to get to the next, got to go talk to tutors, got to go do this. And the parents said, can we come back and talk to you more about your sleep philosophy and how you'll help Bowden put that together while he's here? Yeah. And I thought, dream come true. Dream come true. And their commitment to all of those efforts. But he's one. Now, if somebody goes back and flips through the book and sees minutes played at Butler his freshman year, he barely saw the floor. But in practice, his motor would run. He just was not where he needed to be to fulfill a spot on the floor in competition. Yeah. But now he's going into his 5th year, I think he'll be at Nebraska. So 2 at Butler and whatever. But Bowden Kapke, my athlete of the year.
He'll fit well out there with Fred Hoiberg's system. I think the way he plays.
Yeah. And so it's those. So development was slow and so forth, but he would stick so true to his beliefs and how he would never waver. Yeah. And that's I just wish more athletes programs would allow for more time to develop those assets, nurture them. Some of them don't even know they're there. They're dormant seeds in the soil that haven't been given the opportunity to be watered and sunshine and so on and so forth. But man, it's there. And I look at Mike Conley, who's
still playing
with the Minnesota Timberwolves, played at Lawrence North High School here in Indianapolis, goes to Ohio State, plays for Thad Matta, and he's a okay point guard in the Big Ten. They go to the finals. And I remember his dad, Michael Conley Sr., who was an amazing athlete himself, told me one time, he says, Ralph, if he weren't so good at basketball, he'd be a medalist. He would be an Olympic medalist in the long jump because of his acceleration and straight line speed. Yeah. And then I started watching his speed on the basketball court in games. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And then talking to Thad Matta, his coach at Ohio State, about it, Thad was like blown. He said, Ralph, you didn't see the practices where his speed, his acceleration was incredible. Yeah. And he learned early on Dad's influence.
Yeah, right.
Dad's influence.
Yep. Fell from a good tree.
Fell from a very good tree, and how to take care of himself and physically, mentally, spiritually. Yeah, I mean, he just really, Mike Conley is another that you can put in that category of take care of himself. Yeah.
Became the best version of himself, for sure.
Yeah. So if you're going to tell high school coaches, you got $1,000. What are you going to tell them to buy for their athletes?
A bunch of Roga foam rollers. I don't work for them, but we got $1,000.
But why foam rollers? Let's go back to that a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, what are you really doing? I get on a foam roller now because of your influence, and it hurts.
Yeah.
But man, I feel good because I'm getting better. But anyway, I'll let you tell the story.
I'm just going to say you have to live it to believe it. And I'm an old, what Huddy would call me.
Yeah.
And But you do. I mean, we all get one shot, one opportunity. No one's giving us a second body. And, I've always said if I write a book, it'll be if I knew then what I know now, it's still the unknown because, man, I go back and do so many things over as an athlete because of what I've experienced and learned from others. And just a collection of those that I've got to rub shoulders with. So, I start with the foam roller every day to get the body gliding and sliding freely. Excuse me, I'm going from the bottom up, but mobility. So we'll talk about that. Big toe mobility. I got a grumpy right toe. All right. My left toe is fine. But so I start with that. I do some ankle mobility, do some hip mobility, some T-spine mobility, get my neck turning side to side, up and down, and make sure my shoulders are moving. And so that's kind of your mobility routine. And then once you got that, then you go into the flexibility of the muscles and tendons. So then I'll do some bandage stretching, that sort of thing. And then it's turning everything on, muscle activation, wake it up, turn it on. And then so by the time I'm getting into a strength session or a movement session, everything's firing fast, right? People are going to poo-poo. They will. You're listening. You're going to poo-poo that. You're going to poo-poo stretching. You're going to poo-poo because it's like, well, you're slowing down the nervous system. No, I'm gonna wake it back up. If you think I put it to sleep, which I haven't, it's going to get awake before we get into anything that's going to be dynamic or explosive in the weight room from a lifting standpoint, that sort of thing. So you're spending $1,000. Everybody, I mean, it's $30. Everybody needs to own their own foam roller. This is for a track program, distance program. Is that what's
Yeah. I got to tell this quick story. Jesse Hamlin became a pro athlete a couple weeks ago, ran the 5K USA Track and Field 5K championship here in Indianapolis, finished 8th in his first pro race, did great. And I saw him before the race in the elite athlete tent. And I said, we were chatting. I said, hey, he was on a foam roller. I said, got your foam roller. And of course he says, it's my portable Ralph Reiff, and
he gets it.
He gets it. Jesse just so gets it. This athlete come out of Fort Wayne High School and just to see his development and his strength and what you did with him. But everything, we go back to this spending $1,000. We haven't talked about 25-pound weight. No. We haven't talked about a barbell. No. We haven't talked about a cage. We haven't talked about anything metal that you have to build and construct and so forth. As I said, for a lot of years at St. Vincent Sports Performance, we could do what we did in a garage.
Yep, for sure.
Because of the skill of the clinicians. You don't need... Sorry for those who are trying to get budgeted money and so forth, but
which I am, Ralph.
Yeah, I know you are. Yeah, so Butler University needs an enormous weight room for Greg and his athletes, but you can get so much done. Planks, body weight, 2 feet, 1 foot, on your forearms, on your back, tightening your core, firing your glutes in sequence, and there's just so much that can be done. And then you throw on a elastic strap.
Well, yeah, you're at $30 with the foam roller, and then I bet his next thing would be a loop band, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So now what are those? $10?
Yeah, 15. Yeah. Let's call it $15. So now we're up to $45 per athlete, right?
Yeah.
And you could get so much done with that stuff.
100%, because your body's your body weight that you got to carry around the rest of your life.
Right.
Time under tension is going to increase the intensity of it.
Time under tension.
It's what it becomes.
What's that mean?
Time under tension is just, how long can you, in different positions, all right? So we talked about geometry and language, okay? So geometry, am I going to hold the quarter squat? Am I going to hold a 90-degree squat? Just different positions, being strong in different positions.
Yeah.
The knees over toes, we've been doing knees over toes for everything. I'm not taking anything away from anybody that's driving that, but if you've been training appropriately, you've won a positive shin angle because the start line's behind you. I'm not going back there. I'm going to the finish line. Right. So you better be in that positive shin angle going that way. Well, it'd be in a positive shin angle. Where's your knee?
Yeah.
It's over your toes.
Scott and I and Jake Crow and John Grant, we were so fortunate a couple of weeks ago to spend an evening dinner with Jenny Simpson.
Yeah.
Jenny, look her up, right? If you don't know who Jenny Simpson is, look her up. USA track and field athlete, and the only American to medal in the women's 1500 in the Olympics, I think, at that point in Rio.
And, she was bronze medalist.
And anyway, we got talking about all kinds of things, and she was talking about coming out of Colorado, and she was training with one of the assistant strength coaches who had more responsibility to hockey than anything else, and was really into slide board utilization and slide disc and that kind of stuff. And she said that one of the best things that she did was spend that year doing work on the slide board, hamstrings, glutes, core stabilization, adductor strength, right? And so you can either buy a board. I'm thinking
Portable slide board.
Portable slide board. Or you can buy some disc, or you can make something up at the hardware that you can buy and put under your foot to do all kinds of activities.
Or get a bath towel out and put it on a hard surface.
There you go.
Cheaper yet.
Yeah, on a Formica floor or a basketball court, right?
Put 2 different bath towels underneath your feet. You got your slide board, unless you're working on lateral
and then
pushing.
you go to the upper body and you start putting your hands and elbows on those slide elements, and now you're doing plyometrics for your shoulder stability and your upper girdle and so forth. But that resonated so much with me that Jenny gave, and she's going back. I don't want to date her here, but I'll just say comfortably 20 years.
Oh, no,
college.
she was 20 years old, 1920.
Yeah.
At University of Colorado.
Yeah, and just the benefit that she still talks about from doing that inexpensive but powerful development of the firing patterns of the backside, front side, core.
Yeah, the aha moments.
Yeah.
I mean, you remember them.
Absolutely.
I think, aha moment, I think back to 2004, would give a lot of credit to Lauren Seagrave and who I am today as a speed development. I mean, I'm only touched Lauren Seagrave in my career. I mean, he had 50 athletes at the time were either world champions or Olympic champions, but studying underneath him for a year changed how I taught speed development. But he said, Greg, anybody can make you tired, not everybody can make you better.
Yeah.
And I mean,
say that louder for the people that didn't have the podcast turned up.
Anybody can make you tired, not everybody can make you better. And that really stuck with me. Obviously, it's still today, but it all goes back to I'm just a hardware store looking for contractors, because in my career, I honestly believe I've made nobody strong and nobody fast, and those that know me would agree with me. I've just had the opportunity to work with really good contractors, because at the end of the day, that student athlete has to pick up the tools, own them, and to accomplish anything. Bing Hudson, I knew him when he was behind the ears up at St. Vincent, junior high. I don't even know how old he was. I mean,
He's 3.
Yeah. So, and now look at him, long and strong steeplechaser down there in Lipscomb, and saw that video the other day. It's like, it just
wasn't that cool?
It just makes you proud.
Yeah.
Because no one did it but Bing.
Yep.
And that's everybody.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, it's we've all gained so much from one another, and that's one of the great beauties of working alongside somebody.
Yeah.
Particularly same profession or other disciplines, is the ability to be a listener, to be athlete-centric in how you go about your work. What's the best thing we all can do for the person, whether it's the patient, the client, whatever moniker you want to put on the individual. But how do we find, I spend a lot of my time now connecting the dots for people. I was talking with some folks in another state the other day who had questions about somebody in their family, and they, and they said, well, we went to this sports medicine doc, and what did they do? Well, they did this, and they did what? Now, this is very positive. I said, that physician did what? Yeah, they had the athlete, my family member sit on the edge of the table and push down on their femur because he was concerned about, I think he was concerned about maybe a femoral stress fracture. I said, in my world, it's not every physician that's going to pull that out of their diagnostic toolkit in the first exam after listening to the athlete and listening to things. And I said, you stick with that person. Stick with them. Well, we really like them. I said, that's awesome, because that person has, it just told me a whole story. And so that's what I try to do for people is when I'm putting them, I remember I had the conversation when Thad Matta came to Butler University, and we were talking about strength coaches and so forth. And I said, if you want a strength coach that's going to yell, scream, knock on doors in the hotel, wake people up, and all that stuff, don't hire Greg Moore.
And he didn't.
And he did not, right? But because that's not Greg Moore, and there's a place for a louder voice. Sure. There's a place for that, right?
Yep.
But everybody finds their, is sort of like, we hear people all the time saying, well, we want them to have the best version of themselves. Well, people who are authentic about who they are, realize every once in a while, I talk about every once in a while, you ought to look in the rearview mirror, Ralph, and don't be anxious about what's in front of you, because all you have to do is look in the rearview mirror and look at 68 years that you've survived. And it's not all been easy. Yeah. And I've survived. So why would I be anxious about what's ahead? And so when did I start to realize that? Probably about age 64, right? So life, the maturity
slow
of things.
Learner.
Yeah, slow learner. And so when we expect other human beings at age 16 to figure out that, man, spending time in the weight room and spending time doing these little activities and getting to sleep when nobody else is getting to sleep, put your phone down when nobody else is putting that's hard. Yeah. That's hard work. Yeah. But those who can be an influence can influence. Yeah. And so what you hope to surround yourself with is people who are influencing the right way, right? Yeah. And I think we're a long ways away from mobility right now, but it all packages together, right? Yeah. And so how many athletes have you faced who've had that glaze on their eyes, like, why am I here with this strength coach? But you don't give up on them, right? Yeah. And patients that you work with in your environment, and they get on the table and they're not quite sure, we know, those of us who've been around athletes who've had, or human beings who've had surgery, and they come in and it's like, were you doing your exercises? Well, I can tell you haven't been doing your exercises. But here's another side story. This, I had K. Donald Shelbourne tell me this one time, and I genius. Don Shelbourne, anterior cruciate ligament surgeon, out of Wabash and then University of Wisconsin, and he came and he changed the trajectory of anterior cruciate ligament management in the city of Indianapolis and a larger region. And I remember talking to him and Mark, his physical therapist. Oh, shoot.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, somebody out there's yelling at me right now.
Yeah, they are.
But I remember going into their shop one time, their clinic, and saying, you know what? We started accelerating rehabilitation, taking them out of the cast, taking them out of the splint, doing quick rehab on ACL repairs, because we'd have people who come back who weren't following the protocol, threw their crutches away, took their splint off because they had to get back to work, and they were doing okay.
Yeah.
And so instead of closing their mind and saying, that's wrong, they learned from the patient population, and they learned and torqued it, and that's killing me.
Mark DiCarlo.
Mark DiCarlo.
There you go.
Yeah, look him up. Google Don Shelbourne, MD, Mark DiCarlo, PT, and look at accelerated rehabilitation. They changed the world because they listen to the patient.
Yeah. Look,
And-
listen, and feel extraordinaires. Right
Exactly. And I just, I marvel at that story because we can learn a lot, and think how much we've learned from the athletes
Observe,
and the
yeah,
people that we've not only had the opportunity to have our fingerprints on,
there. Yeah.
but our colleagues around us that challenge us with questions. Yeah, our friend Daryl Barnes would always go, get frustrated, right? Oh, Daryl, get frustrated. I got to go home and read more about this. I got to read more about this. And he'd come in the next day and tell his patient, or, hey, I was reading in this book about this stuff. And patients were loving that, because it proved to them his engagement, his concern, his care about that situation. Yeah. And so it all bundles together to one. The three of us are sitting here having had a long journey of work. You two are still working. I'm
Connecting the dots, which you've been doing forever.
I'm just connecting the dots, and how we've been able to have fun doing it. There's believe me, and you guys know me and my story about some things. I've had some. God has a sense of humor, right? And
Yes, he does.
So it's just been great having you here as we wrap up. Greg, you're an extraordinary person. You've made us better, and the people who you've, I still smile so much when I think about, I saw some of the tennis players at Butler who were graduating this year, and just how you might have heard some of it, but in the training room upstairs, they'd come in and say, man, Greg Moore's the best. They just would. They just, unprovoked, they just say, man, Greg Moore is the best. And just these tennis players from all over the world who are at Butler, and you made an impact on their lives. And so thank you for all of that. And so Fingerprints on Medals, this concludes this hour. We'd love to have your feedback. Subscribe, write some comments, send me an email, those of you who watch and wherever that might be. But on behalf of everybody here tonight, we'll sign off. Thank you.